How to become the person everything works out for. Neville Goddard. Neville Goddard taught that the whole of Scripture is not a record of ancient men, but a mirror held up to your own consciousness, written so that one day you would recognize yourself in every line. Psalm 1 verse 3 tells of a man, and it says, "He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper." And Neville read this not as a description of a lucky man in an old land, but as a description of a state of consciousness. For the tree is not planted by accident, it is planted by rivers. And the rivers are the assumptions that run beneath your visible life, feeding it without your labor. And this is why he prospers in all he does, not because he strains for it, but because what is rooted in the unseen must appear in the seen. And this is the secret behind the person for whom everything seems to work out. They did not get lucky, they got rooted. So let us plant ourselves right now. Say with me, I am the one for whom everything works out. I am rooted in the river of my own assumption. Imagination creates my reality. Say it with me. I am the one for whom everything works out. I am rooted in the river of my own assumption. Imagination creates my reality. Again, I am the one for whom everything works out. I am rooted in the river of my own assumption. Imagination creates my reality. And if these words feel like water finding root in you, subscribe now so that tomorrow's teaching reaches you the moment it is planted. Before we go further, type the words "it's done" in the comments below, not as a wish but as a seed already in the ground. Let it be your declaration that the tree is already planted and the fruit is already forming. The first key is this: the fruit is never the cause, it is only the evidence. So many people spend their whole life laboring over leaves, polishing the branches, trying to force a fruit to appear by working on the visible tree. But Neville taught again and again that the visible is only the shadow of the invisible. So if you want different fruit, you do not argue with the leaves. You go beneath the ground, to the root, to the river, to the assumption feeding the whole structure. Picture a man standing before his own apple tree every morning, wiping each leaf clean, checking each branch for signs of fruit, growing anxious when none appears. So he wipes harder, he prunes more aggressively, he even ties little ribbons to the branches hoping fruit will somehow gather there. And all the while the soil beneath him is dry because he has never once gone to the root. This is exactly how most people treat their bank account, their body, their marriage. They scrub at the leaf that is visible, the low number, the ache, the cold silence at dinner, when the whole time the only real work was ever beneath the surface, in the assumption, in the state quietly held day and night. And this is the first shift the person everything works out for has made. They stopped negotiating with their circumstances and started tending the state beneath them. Because a fig tree cannot bring forth olives no matter how hard it strains, and a life rooted in doubt cannot bring forth ease no matter how hard you smile at it or arrange the leaves just so. The fruit follows the root, always, without exception. And once you truly know this in your bones, you stop being a nervous farmer of leaves, forever polishing what is already grown, and you quietly become a farmer of the unseen river running beneath your days, tending what nobody else can see, trusting that the tending is the only labor that was ever required. The second key is this: the river is your habitual assumption about yourself, not your occasional wish. Neville was clear that it is not the prayer you say once in desperation that shapes your life. It is the state you live in day after day without noticing. The tree by the river does not pray for water once a week. It stands in it continuously. It never once considers drought, because standing in the water has become so constant that it no longer feels like an act of faith at all. It feels like simply being alive. And this is why the person everything works out for is not the one who hopes hardest in a crisis, but the one whose ordinary, unremarkable background assumption about themselves is calm, is expectant, is already provided for, long before any crisis ever shows itself. Think of two people who lose the very same job on the very same afternoon. One goes home and quietly assumes, of course something better is already arranged for me. This is only a doorway closing so a wider one can open. And she says it so plainly, it barely feels like faith at all. It feels like simply describing the weather. She makes herself tea. She calls a friend. She sleeps soundly that night. Not because she is unusually brave, but because calm has simply been her habitual water for years. The other goes home and assumes, here we go again, nothing ever holds for me. And he says it just as plainly, just as automatically. He does not decide to feel this way any more than she decided to feel her way. Both of them are simply speaking the river they have stood in for so long they no longer notice it is a river at all. They think it is just how life is. They think it is just how they are, when really it is only the water they have grown used to. And here is the quiet truth Neville pointed to again and again. Neither of them is describing the job market. Both of them are describing their river. And within a season, the outer facts begin arranging themselves to match the assumption that was already running beneath the surface long before the news ever came. She finds herself in conversation with someone at a dinner party who happens to mention an opening, and it feels like luck, but it is only fruit. He finds every door he knocks on a little heavier than the last, and he calls this bad luck too, but it is also only fruit, the very same fruit, grown from two very different roots, planted long before either of them had a job to lose. Now bring this key even closer to your own ordinary week. Think of how you speak about your body when you catch a cold. Some people say quietly and automatically, I always bounce back fast, and they barely notice they are saying it. Others say just as automatically, I always get hit hard. It always lingers with me, and neither one is consulting a doctor in that moment. They are consulting their river. Think of how you speak about money when an unexpected bill appears. Some hear the sound and think, oh, that is fine. It always works out. And others hear the very same sound and feel their whole chest tighten with, of course. This always happens to me. The bill is identical. The two rivers are not, and the river, far more than the bill, decides how the story ends. This is why the person everything works out for is rarely found working harder in a crisis than anyone else. They are simply not standing in the same water. Their calm was not manufactured. The day trouble arrived. It was already there. Already old, already the quiet, unremarkable habit of years, tended so long it stopped feeling like a discipline and simply became their nature. So the real question is never what am I hoping for today? The question is what have I quietly, repeatedly, almost carelessly assumed about myself for so long that I no longer even notice I am assuming it, because that unnoticed assumption is the actual river, and the river, running silent and unseen beneath every ordinary Tuesday, beneath every cold, every bill, every job, every glance from a stranger, decides long before any circumstance appears which fruit is even possible for you to bear. The third key is this. You plant the river by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not by wishing, not by hoping, not by watching the branches for signs. Neville taught that the feeling is the secret, that imagination without feeling is only a picture on a wall, but imagination joined to feeling becomes a seed pressed into living soil. So let us make this plain with something ordinary. Picture a woman waiting to hear whether she got a certain position. All day she checks her phone, she refreshes her messages, she studies the silence for meaning. She is standing at the tree staring at an empty branch demanding it produce fruit right now through sheer attention. This is what most of the world calls faith, but it is only anxiety wearing faith's clothing. Now picture instead that same woman, in a quiet, unremarkable moment, simply feeling the way she would feel if the offer were already hers. The small release in the shoulders, the calm way she would answer the phone knowing the outcome, the private smile of someone who no longer needs to check anything because the matter is already settled within. That feeling, held gently and without strain, is the actual planting, not the checking, not the hoping, not the story she tells her friends about how badly she wants it. The feeling alone is the seed, and Neville was firm on this point. He said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and continue therein, meaning you do not visit the feeling once and abandon it, you return to it the way you return to water. So if you want ease with money, you do not sit and beg for ease. You assume now the unhurried feeling of a person who has already paid what needed paying, who opens their accounts without flinching, who moves through a store without the tight chest of scarcity. And if you want a relationship healed, you do not plead with heaven for it to be healed. You feel now, quietly, the relief of two people already at peace, already speaking gently to one another, already home in each other's company. The fruit in its season is simply the unforced, unhurried result of a feeling that has been allowed to become familiar, which is why forcing never works. You cannot pull a green fruit down and call it ripe by sheer impatience. No amount of shaking the branch hurries the sun, but you can plant the feeling today, quietly, without announcement, and let the river carry it underground while your outer life continues its ordinary business. The dishes still get washed, the commute still happens. Nothing outwardly dramatic marks the moment of planting, and this is precisely why so many miss it. They expect the planting to feel momentous, but it is usually as plain as closing your eyes for 2 minutes and simply feeling settled about a thing that has not yet shown itself. And then one ordinary morning, with no fanfare, the fruit is simply there, already ripe, already yours. The phone rings with the answer you had already felt. The account settles in a way you had already rehearsed inwardly. The relationship softens in a manner you had already lived in feeling, long before it appeared in fact, and you almost forget you ever planted anything because it seems to have arrived on its own. And in the deepest sense it did arrive on its own, once you finally stopped interfering with the root by staring so hard at the branch. The fourth key is this: you are not the drought, and you are not the storm. You are the one standing in the river. Neville taught that you move into states the way you move into rooms. You are not stuck in the room called doubt or the room called lack. You have simply been standing in it so long you have started calling it home. And this is worth sitting with for a moment, because most people believe they are their circumstance. They say, I am broke, I am sick, I am rejected, as if the state were their very identity. But Neville was precise about this. You are not the state. You only visit it, the way you might walk into a cold room and shiver. The cold is real in that room, but you are not the cold. You are the one who walked in, and you are the one who can walk out. Think of an ordinary morning. A man wakes and checks his phone before his feet even touch the floor, and there is an email that unsettles him, a number in an account that looks thin, a message from someone that sounds like disappointment, and in that instant his whole day tips. He carries that email into his coffee, into his commute, into the meeting at noon. He has, without noticing, moved into a room called "This is going wrong." And because he is standing in that room, he begins furnishing it. He replays the message. He imagines worse versions of it. He tells a coworker about it with a heavy voice. And by evening, the small, unsettling email has grown walls and a ceiling, and he is living inside it as if it were the whole house. But here is what Neville would ask him, and what he now asks you. Whose room is this really? Did life force you into it? Or did you walk in this morning half asleep and forget there was a door? Because the door is always there. The door is the simple, quiet act of saying inwardly, I am not this state, I am only visiting it. And choosing instead to stand in the river, to feel for a moment the version of the day where the email is already resolved, where the number in the account has already turned, where the message was never a threat but only weather passing overhead. This is not denial of what your eyes see. It is refusal to let what your eyes see become what your root drinks. Because a tree does not become the drought around it. If its roots are truly in the river, the drought can rage above ground, and the tree still bears fruit in its season. The tree's life is not determined by the visible weather. It is determined by what it is secretly drinking underground where no one else can see. And this is the deep comfort hidden inside this key. When circumstances look dry, when the job looks uncertain, when the bank account looks thin, when the diagnosis sounds heavy, when the phone rings and your stomach drops, none of that is your root. All of that is only weather passing over ground. And weather changes, it always changes, It has never once stayed the same for long. But a root that is anchored in the assumption already fulfilled does not care what the sky is doing today. It does not consult the clouds before deciding whether to grow. So the practice here is simple and almost fierce in its gentleness. Whenever the outer scene tries to convince you that you are the drought, whenever a bill or a glance or a silence tries to tell you who you are, quietly and without argument remind yourself, I am not this state. I am only visiting it. My root is elsewhere. My root is in the feeling of the wish already fulfilled. And notice, this is not pretending the room is warm when it is cold. It is remembering that you were never the room at all. You were always the one who could leave it. And the moment you remember the door, even the coldest room loses its power to hold you, because the weather has no authority over the river. It never did. It only ever borrowed authority from your forgetting. The fifth key is this. Everyone around your tree is you, pushed out. Neville taught that this whole world is a mirror of your own consciousness, so that every face you meet across a lifetime is really a leaf from your own tree, wearing a stranger's name, and nothing proves this more plainly than the small, ordinary moments that make up an ordinary week. Picture a Sunday dinner, the kind every family knows, the plates passed, the conversation drifting toward your latest plan, and someone at the table, maybe an uncle, maybe an older sibling, raises an eyebrow and says something like, well, you know how these things usually go for you, and in that instant it is easy to feel outnumbered, to feel that the whole room has quietly voted against your future. But Neville would have you pause right there and ask a very different question. Not who is against me tonight, but what have I been secretly assuming about myself, that needed a face and a voice to say it out loud. Because that uncle did not invent his doubt about you from nothing. He is only reading lines you wrote long before he ever sat down at that table. He is a branch, and you are the root. And the orchard can only grow what the root has already decided is true. Now widen this same key into the workplace. Think of the coworker who always seems to be handed the easy assignment, the one who walks into the manager's office and walks out with the raise. And something in you tightens, a small ache that says, why not me? But look again, because that coworker is not a rival. That coworker is a reflection standing in your own orchard, showing you a state you have not yet fully claimed as your own. They are you, pushed out, wearing someone else's shoes, demonstrating the very ease you have been circling around but have not yet stepped fully into. So instead of envying the branch, go quietly to the root. Assume for yourself the feeling of being someone recognized, someone chosen, someone for whom the raise, the invitation, the open door is simply normal, and watch how strangely the orchard begins to rearrange itself around that new root. Sometimes it is the coworker's tone that softens first. Sometimes it is an entirely new door that opens somewhere you never thought to look. Because you were never really negotiating with them, you were only ever in conversation with yourself, dressed up and walking around in the world so that you could finally see what you actually believe. This is why arguing with people rarely changes anything lasting. You can win the debate at the dinner table and still go home with the same doubt humming quietly underneath you, waiting to produce another unk. The sixth key is this, and it is the one that seals all the others. You enter the river most deeply in the state akin to sleep. Neville Goddard taught that just before sleep, when the body has grown heavy and still but the mind has not yet gone fully dark, the imagination stands at its most open door, because the arguing part of you, the part that spends the daylight hours defending its doubts and rehearsing its complaints, has finally grown too tired to keep watch. And in that drowsy hush, the feeling you hold is accepted the way soft wax accepts a seal, without resistance, without debate. This is why 5 unguarded minutes at night can outweigh a whole day of gritted determination, because determination still argues, while the drowsy feeling simply believes. Picture an ordinary evening. A woman comes home from work, carrying the whole day on her shoulders. A hard conversation with her manager still ringing in her ears. A stack of bills still open on the table. And if she carries that exact feeling to bed, replaying the manager's tone, rehearsing what she should have said, She is unknowingly watering tomorrow with tonight's disappointment. But suppose instead she lies down, lets her shoulders drop, lets her breathing slow, and in that soft, dim place before sleep, she quietly lives a different scene. She feels the warmth of her manager's respect. She feels the light relief of the bills already settled, not as a fantasy held at arm's length, but as a truth felt from the inside. This is what Neville Goddard called living in the end, not imagining a scene like a spectator, but occupying it like a resident, feeling it as naturally as she feels the mattress beneath her, and she falls asleep not from exhaustion, but from that felt assumption. And this, quietly, is how the river is planted, while the world assumes she is only resting. And this hour is also the hour of revision, for if the day has left a bruise, you do not have to carry that bruise into tomorrow simply because it is the version that happened. Neville Goddard taught that the day is not fixed the moment it is over. It is only fixed the moment you stop revising it in imagination. So before sleep, take the difficult exchange and replay it as it should have gone. Hear the harsh words softened. See the door that seemed to close instead open. Feel the apology that never came arrive gently in the quiet of your own mind. This is not pretending. This is correcting. Because to the deeper mind, a vividly felt revision is not a lie about what happened. It is instruction about what is real. And the mind at this hour, being unguarded, does not argue with a better story. It simply receives it and begins from that moment to build tomorrow upon it rather than upon the wound. Think of the river again. The assumption you plant with such feeling does not rush to the surface overnight. There is a season between the planting and the fruit, and this is where so many lose heart. They assume beautifully for one evening, and then a difficult afternoon arrives, a bill comes due, a phone call goes badly, and they mistake the weather for the root. They conclude the assumption failed, when in truth the fruit was simply still forming underground where no eye could see it. Persistence is nothing more elaborate than refusing to let one hard afternoon undo what was planted the night before. It is returning again to that same drowsy hour, night after unremarkable night, feeling the same fulfilled wish with the same quiet confidence. Not because the outer scene has changed yet, but because you have learned that the outer scene is always the last thing to change, and the gap between the planting and the appearing is not evidence against you. The gap is only the underground work. No gardener is ever shown while it is happening. So let the last waking thought of your day be a felt truth and not a rehearsed complaint. Let the final feeling before sleep be the one you wish to wake up standing in, because you will rise in the morning already rooted in whatever you fell asleep feeling. And if you do this quietly, without straining, without checking the branches each morning for premature fruit, you will find one ordinary day that the very thing you assumed in that soft, dark hour has simply arrived, dressed as coincidence, dressed as good timing, dressed as someone changing their mind on their own, when in truth it only ever came from the river you tended in your sleep. Here is the whole picture. The fruit is only evidence, so stop arguing with leaves. The river is your habitual assumption, running quietly beneath your days. You plant that river by assuming the feeling of the wish, already fulfilled. You are never the drought or the storm. You are only visiting a state, while your true root stays elsewhere. Everyone who reflects doubt or ease back to you is you seen in the orchard of your own imagination. And the deepest planting happens in the drowsy hush before sleep, where feeling meets no resistance, and the assumption sinks in unopposed. If you are ready to stop tending leaves and start tending the river itself, if you want a steady hand guiding you each night into that drowsy state where the wish is quietly planted, consider joining the 21-day reality shift, a simple daily path built to help you live in the end, every single day, until it is no longer a practice, but simply who you are, until you look up one ordinary morning and realize the fruit has already arrived. So let us plant it once more, together. Say it with me. I am the one for whom everything works out. I am rooted in the river of my own assumption. Imagination creates my reality. I am the one for whom everything works out. I am rooted in the river of my own assumption. Imagination creates my reality. And as you go now, remember, the tree does not strain for its fruit. It simply stays planted by the river, and so do you. So it is.